Satan. Can you think of a character more evil than he? Even when I hear the word today, I remember those times as a child when I would lay awake at night, fearing Satan was going to attack me. During the initial stages of my deconversion, I was convinced that it was Satan who was causing my doubts about God. It was the devil who was leading me astray. I wrestled with this for months until one day I came to this conclusion. If I were ever going to find the truth about God, I must first find the truth about Satan. In my mind, the two seemed to be inseparably joined together. If one did not exist, then perhaps the other didn't either. During this time, I spent hours in research about Satan. I combed through every verse that mentioned him or his demons. I read many commentaries, papers, and a book by Elaine Pagels entitled The Origin of Satan. Many of the points I will discuss in this series were things I discovered during this time. Satan plays a very prominent role in the New Testament. He is referenced as Satan 39 times and as the devil 61 times. When you include demons and evil spirits, the total references exceed 200. In the New Testament, Satan is the enemy of both God and man. This is even demonstrated by some of his titles: the Tempter, the Deceiver, and the Devourer. Most individuals assume that the Satan found in the New Testament is the same being that is also found in the Old Testament. However, this isn't true. Satan plays a very small role in Judaism, and the role he does play is much different than that in Christianity. To understand how the Satan myth evolved into what it is today, let's set some context here. Although blatantly obvious, I must ask this question. What is the main difference between monotheism and polytheism? The difference, of course, is that polytheists believe in multiple gods and monotheists believe in one God. So you ask, why is this important? Well, polytheistic religions have a built-in way to explain both good and evil. In most forms of polytheism, the gods themselves are neither solely good nor solely evil, but usually contain characteristics of both. Additionally, there is no single omnipotent being, but there is usually a struggle between the deities themselves. However, monotheism doesn't have this same luxury when explaining evil. In monotheism, there is only one omnipotent being. So how does monotheistic religion account for evil in the world? There aren't a lot of options here. Either God, who has the ability to prevent evil, allows it, or he is the one who actually causes it. Now, some argue that the first option actually collapses into the second when you ask the question, how did evil begin to exist anyway? If God is the omnipotent creator, then didn't he have to create evil himself? From a careful reading of the Old Testament, it is quite clear that God himself causes evil, not some other being. We find a perfect example of this in the book of Exodus. Here it was God who hardened Pharaoh's heart and prevented him from letting the Jews go. Because Pharaoh didn't let the Jews go, it was God who sent the plagues upon Egypt. And here's the kicker. Pharaoh was punished for an action over which he didn't have control. So God caused it, and Pharaoh reaped the consequences. Now, in the final and worst plague upon Egypt, it was God himself who sent the destroyer to kill the firstborn sons of the Egyptians. Who was the destroyer? It was an angel of God doing God's work. There is no mention of Satan in these passages. It is solely God who does this. This same theme that it is God who causes evil is echoed in Isaiah 45:7, which says, I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things. Here, the prophet says that it is God who causes calamity. Calamity is the Hebrew word re, which is used 663 times in the Old Testament. In 442 of those, it is translated as evil, and in 59 times, it is translated as wickedness. The word re is also found in Genesis 2:9, which says, And out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. According to Isaiah, it is God himself who causes evil, not Satan. Now, in 2 Chronicles 18, we find this. And Micaiah said, Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, Who will entice Ahab, the king of Israel, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, By what means? And he said, I will go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. And he said, You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of these your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster concerning you. Notice, it was God who sent the lying spirit. Now some of you are probably saying, this can't be right. God can't be the cause of evil. Didn't Satan tempt Eve in the Garden of Eden? Christian tradition has held that it was Satan disguised as a serpent who tempted Eve. However, when one carefully reads the passage without assuming the serpent was Satan, it becomes quite clear that the serpent was, well, a serpent. Genesis 3:1 says, Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. Notice that this verse identifies the culprit as a serpent, a beast of the field. It wasn't Satan, but instead a crafty snake. Now notice the punishment that God gives the serpent in verse 14. The Lord God said to the serpent, Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. Surely, if it was Satan disguised as a serpent, the punishment would have been on him. But this isn't the case. The punishment was to the serpent. He was relegated to crawl on his belly for the rest of his life. There is nothing in this passage, either explicit or implicit, that would suggest it was Satan being punished. Now the following are some common arguments that Christians make to show that the serpent was indeed Satan. Number 1, the snake could talk. Now, since snakes can't talk, it's quite obvious that it must have been Satan in disguise. Well, I agree in part. Snakes can't talk. However, if the Eden story was meant to convey that animals couldn't talk at that time, then why did Eve react the way she did? I mean, she should have asked, How in the hell are you talking? But she didn't. She didn't seem surprised at all. Therefore, I think that we can reasonably conclude that in the Garden of Eden, before the fall of man, we are expected to believe that animals and reptiles could talk. A second argument given to show that the serpent must have been Satan is to cite Ezekiel 28:13. Here, a being claiming to be God was in the Garden of Eden. I will address this passage in detail in the next video, but I can tell you here that the individual identified in Ezekiel 28:13 isn't Satan. A third argument given to show that Satan must have been the serpent in the Garden of Eden is to cite Revelations 12:9, which says, And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Now, citing a New Testament reference only proves the point I'm trying to make. Not once is Satan ever identified as a serpent in the Old Testament. To come to this conclusion, one must look into the New Testament. A fourth argument given to show that the serpent must have been Satan is to state that Genesis 3:15 is a prophecy of Jesus and Satan. The passage says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Some Christians argue that the snake bruising the heel of Eve's descendants points to the death of Jesus, and the descendants bruising the snake's head points to Satan's ultimate defeat by being cast into the lake of fire. However, let me offer a more plausible explanation. Having lived in 2 states that have a lot of poisonous snakes, I can tell you that I don't like them, and I don't know many people who do. Although I should probably transplant them when I find them, I don't. I kill them. Why? Because they are poisonous and I don't like them. Doesn't this seem like what is being described by the verse? All of these arguments to show that Satan was the serpent in Eden fail miserably. Now, if it's true that Judaism viewed evil as coming from God and not another being, where did Satan come from? I will address this question in the next video. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think.